Good afternoon, everybody. This is Don DeRay from Concensus Technologies, and welcome to our Compliance Made Easier webinar. I'm your co-host today, and David Lindmann, the CEO from ComplianceShield, will be another panelist today. I just want to make sure, raise of hands, just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Let's get started. We got a lot to go over today. So just a brief introduction for those of you that don't know Concensus. We are a identity and access management company, cybersecurity and cloud services. We provide sales, service, and support to companies of all sizes all across the United States. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. So we wanted to bring up all the things that Concensus does today around cybersecurity and how we balance our users' convenience with reduced organizational risk. What we mean by that is sometimes, we can put the security in place, but at the same time, we need to let our end users work. So there's a really good balance there. And we also obviously want to reduce that organizational risk. And that's one of the reasons we brought ComplianceShield on today. As we go through these things that we do, Concensus does, we realize that we actually have some gaps on this slide today. So we're going to make a couple announcements today on this webinar just to show you guys how, cybersecurity is a really large and very complicated genre or things that we need to do in IT. And some of this steps outside of the purview of IT nowadays within the cybersecurity realm. So we're going to show you guys how we can actually help you guys with that and use our friends at ComplianceShield to help with that. So what are the current challenges in cybersecurity and compliance? Originally, I had this slide labeled what are our current customer challenges, but since it's 2020, I think that it might have gone on for about 7 years, and I'm not sure how many slides we can actually fit for 2020's issues in here, but we're going to focus on cybersecurity here and compliance in here because the title is, trying to make that compliance a little bit made easier. But one of the things we're really finding out is, how does cybersecurity tie into and why does it hit HR? Well, it hits HR because of the things that are going on today. I'm sure a lot of you are working from home. A lot of times, we're talking about business continuity now. How do we keep the business going? I know a lot of universities, how are they bringing students in? How are we providing that college experience from, the dorm rooms or from home now where we weren't doing those things from home? How are we handling our acceptable use policies for devices that were traditionally inside our offices or that may have moved home because people are working from home now? How is that affecting us these days? Current and new privacy and compliance laws. We have a bunch of different verticals on today, from small, medium banks all the way up to higher education and nonprofits, healthcare. There's a little bit of everybody on today. So there's a lot of compliance out there that we need to be aware of. I've kind of listed a few of those here today under the new privacy and compliance laws that are out there. Some of the ones that are hitting the education market, because I know some of you are on the education market here, is the GLBA. A lot of people have had to do that because they're lending money out to students, but they're actually being audited now and have to comply with that. And how do we comply with everything that's in there? Understanding the NIST guidelines, and a lot of the insurance companies and a lot of these compliance laws refer back to NIST. We have a lot of customers that aren't recognizing the NIST compliance that they have to do, and that really comes down to their cybersecurity insurance. A lot of people are being required to have cybersecurity insurance, and they are not meeting the requirements for that cybersecurity. So the underwriters are asking questions that either the IT folks can't answer, or they're making things up in that realm. And if you're not complying with that, that's really a big liability when it comes time if you do have some kind of cyber breach. And with that said, being a vendor, we've had to go through some vendor assessments working with some of our customers as well, because you have to start doing your due diligence with your vendors now. Are they complying with the same things that you're complying with? So these are some of the challenges that have been brought to us this year. And, Concensus realized we had some gaps in there. So we went out and tried to find, some solutions for those gaps. But I wanted to start off by just giving everybody our view of cybersecurity. When somebody asks, do you guys do cybersecurity? I kind of chuckle because if you take a look at this, cybersecurity 101, the only thing on this slide, if you remember anything about this slide, is cybersecurity is really all about protecting our mission critical assets. And what are those assets? Each organization has its own critical assets that it's doing, whether it's a customer list, whether it's storage, HIPAA in all your patient files and things like that. All those kind of things are our mission critical assets. And how do we deal with those different areas of cybersecurity? You can see down here on the left side, prevention, IT security governance, security policies and compliance, cyber threat intelligence, security architecture and design, security awareness training. A lot of those things you'll see that Concensus and traditionally has not performed over the last couple of years, just because we're not in that area. It's impossible, I think, for one organization to be really good at all of these things. But when we talk about cybersecurity, where do people focus? Data security, identity and access management. That's what we're known for. CM's down there under operations in the bottom right. Those are the kind of things that we have to deal with in security. So if you're really in IT and you're providing any of these, you have a hand in cybersecurity. So I really like that slide because it really shows when somebody thinks, traditionally when they think cybersecurity, they think the SOC or the NOC over there on the right, the monitoring and response part of it, and that is a whole different ball of wax compared to all the other things that we need to do, providing cybersecurity. So we do lump a lot of things that we do: endpoint security, network security, perimeter security. We lump all that in Concensus under cybersecurity. Okay, cyber insurance. I really want folks to pay close attention to this. I've been working in several CEO groups here in the Pittsburgh area and working with them on their cybersecurity insurance. This is the short form that you see here. This is the underwriting information that they're asking for. And every time I see one of these, somebody either doesn't know what they're asking, and they'll check yes that they are doing that. But they may not have a way of actually proving that they're doing that. And because this is insurance, you really need to make sure you're handling all of these. And remember, this is the short form. These are the things that might be doing today, keeping your firewall up to date, keeping your antivirus on your computers. That used to be like the only two questions they would ask. Maybe they would ask C there too. Do you have regular download install patches? If they were really on the ball, they would ask for your backup and recovery procedures. But now we're being asked to provide a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, communications plans, and the one that I mentioned earlier about having to ask your vendors, for that type of information. How do we get that out there? Multi-factor authentication. If you're not running multi-factor authentication, that is my big thing from 2020, is to make sure all our customers are doing multi-factor authentication. All these things in here. And now we're getting into the other questions. Question 2 and 3, are you complying with PCI if you're taking credit cards? Are you HIPAA compliant if you're dealing with any type of healthcare? There's a lot of these things, some very simple questions that have a lot of underpins that do hit the IT department, but also hit the HR department, the security awareness team. There's a lot of different areas that cyber insurance actually hits with something simple like this. I think Dave could tell you here a little bit later that a lot of these are, this is the short form. There are pages and pages of these things if they're actually going to go through some of these things. So let's move on to NIST. NIST here, there's a lot of things that as people get into the NIST framework, this is the NIST cybersecurity framework. For those of you who are not familiar, a lot of the rules and regulations when it comes to IT are going to refer to some of the things in the NIST security framework. And I would say, Concensus in general has always been good at, the identify and protect side of those things. But, we need to be able to respond. How do we do the analysis? How do we do the mitigation? How do we continually, assert ourselves, certify ourselves that we are doing what we need to do to stay compliant with the laws and adhering to this framework? So there's a lot more work that we as IT leaders have to do to keep up with that. So just a question for everybody, and we're not going to take a poll or anything like that, but, I want to know where everybody is, or consider where you are in your journey. Who has at least had a yearly audit? Have you been audited this year? I've had to go through several audits just responding through RFPs this year for our customers. Again, it has to do with the cybersecurity insurance and them doing their due diligence with their vendors. But then, when you've been audited, who has to have an audit and then needs to show that remediation for that audit? And also who thinks it's necessary that they have all the necessary components to prove that they have done that due diligence to auditors or to their insurance company. And finally, what can Concensus do to help? And we're going to announce two things today. First is going to be a new partnership that we have with digital defense. One of the areas where we have done work, but we have not actually had a formal relationship with, is with a company called now Digital Defense. We haven't traditionally done vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, or web application scanning on a continuous basis here. And one of the things that drew us to their platform is that they actually have some relationships with some insurance companies. And you'll see on this picture over here on the right, we have a scan rating, B. That's actually, helps you when you're actually doing your assessment with your insurance company. They actually will take that scan rating. And, what you want to do, obviously, with any type of audit is, here's your score, here's the things that they found, and then here's how we remediate it. If you're doing your vulnerability scanning with this product and you actually improve the situation, you can go from a B to an A. So just think, just like being back at school again, you can actually do this. So a little bit more on Concensus. We'll probably do a webinar next month with digital defense, but this is one of the areas we felt really tied well into with what we're going to be doing with ComplianceShield. So with that said, let me introduce Dave Lindmann, and I'm going to take you off of mute here, Dave, as soon as I find the panelists. There we go. There you go. You're going to be unmuted there in a second as soon as you hit the button. But I do want to introduce Dave Lindmann from ComplianceShield. He's going to talk to us today about ComplianceShield. And Dave, I just wanted to let you know today that we signed our first customer at 1:06 p.m. So that's already going pretty well today, right?
Yeah. Excellent.
And just to let you know, some of the verticals that we have online here with some of our attendees, there's some education customers on here, higher ed and K-12. There's a couple banking, like credit unions and small bank, nonprofits and healthcare. So we've got a little bit of everything today.
All right, well, that's actually perfect. So, hey, thanks so much. And it looks like the sales line is vertical, right? We got a 1-point line.
Right.
I can share my screen. I'm going to try to share the whole screen without blowing up the universe. Let me see. Screen share. I'm going to switch context over to my slides. Don, if you could let me know if the slide pops up.
You're good to go.
Oh, okay, good.
Yep.
All right, well, again, thanks everybody. I wish I knew y'all's names, but again, my name is Dave Lindmann, and I just wanted to walk you through just a couple of slides of kind of how we got here. And so ComplianceShield, we've been in business, a little over 15, 16 years. My experience goes back farther than that. However, we really, kind of cut our teeth on developing this library of security policies and security content that kind of became somewhat of a de facto standard, thankfully. So, we've got customers all over the world, really, in over 106 countries. And what we noticed as of a few years ago was that some of our larger, traditionally we had larger companies as clients, people started coming to us and saying, hey, I'm a small, business. I got 20 people, but I, just signed a deal with Pfizer and they're not letting me make it through. I can't, complete my project unless they show I'm HIPAA compliant. Or, we just signed up a deal with Target and they're asking us if we're PCI compliant. And so there's this need to kind of help people simplify the notion of being quote unquote compliant. And that I'll try to show you what that means because it's kind of an important point. So really what we did is the ComplianceShield product automates this 3-step process. And I'm going to assert to you guys that the different, if it's HIPAA compliance, if it's a PCI audit, if it's a SOC 2 audit, if it's the, obtaining cyber insurance, there's a process that's always the same. Part one is, we call it the definition. So defining what your security program looks like. We call that a security baseline. And I'll show you what that means. For folks with an accounting background, these are basically internal controls. And without going too far off the grid, if y'all remember in the O's, when Enron collapsed and there was this huge focus on Sarbanes-Oxley and accountability for internal controls around accounting, this same exact thing is starting to happen around cybersecurity. So you're going to see, and in fact, in some cases, it's already the case, senior management having to sign off on the effectiveness of their cybersecurity controls. So it's taken on another whole, level at this point. So once you define that, essentially what you've done is signed people up to do things based on their role. So for example, IT folks might have to configure systems, HR might screen employees, employees probably have to go in and take, training. So how do you essentially keep track of all that so that when it comes time to demonstrate, part three, you're really running reports, right? You're not going back to square one. Unfortunately, a lot of people enter our sales funnel when they've already failed their first audit, and so they have to scramble back to one, and they don't have a baseline, and they don't have a bunch of policies to support it. So anyway, that's the process we try to support. We're trying to make it a little bit more like QuickBooks or TurboTax than your traditional tools that I think are actually too complicated in my opinion. So one of the reasons we can do this is, and this is why I thought it's important that everybody, it's great that there's different types of folks on the call. If you ask the question, what does it mean to be secure? You might get at least 6 or 7 different answers depending on who you ask. NIST has NIST frameworks. HIPAA has the HIPAA laws and some high trust certifications. There's GDPR. There's the ISO standard. And for the average person just trying to do their job, to me, this stuff is just unbelievably confusing. So what we've done is created what we call our common policy library. So we have created a methodology where essentially we've distilled these controls from these various frameworks into a single way of doing things. And by doing that, taking a stab and doing that, you create a consistency and a simplicity that is really almost impossible to do over here on the left. And so, on the left, I'd call it kind of the spreadsheet world, unstructured. On the right, we've tried to structure the data just a little bit more, and it kind of enables you to do some things in automation that you could not do. So this is a really important part of what we do. And so, that I mentioned, there's kind of a bucket of functionality. In the cyber world, there are these tools called governance, risk, and compliance. But I think the main way to describe this is you saw that fan diagram that had all the different parts of cybersecurity. Your program is made up of 2 broad types of controls. Technical controls, we call them, which is firewalls, antivirus, a lot of things that we talk about. And then there's administrative controls, which is human resources, change control procedures, disaster recovery plans, things that typically people may already do even, but they don't have them documented or organized. And so that's kind of where we fit in this whole world, is to try to help you do that. And we're trying to basically build out a cyber program that's defensible. So in the unforeseen event that you do have a breach, and maybe if you do want to go collect on your cyber insurance, a big deal is this. Can we show that as a management team, we were actively supporting the cybersecurity program, right? We did some level of due care and due diligence, and that actually goes a long way. So let me see if I can find the software. Okay, what should have happened is you can see the browser. It says ComplianceShield, that's our application. Our demo company here is called My Security IQ. That revolves around our training. But essentially, this is a web portal that the compliance manager would use. And it could be somebody in your organization, or you could outsource it to Don's team or another third party if you wanted to. But what I'd like to do is, so down the left is a number of menu items. But I want to start with this right here. So this graph here is essentially a summary of the entire program in one graph. And you can see there's different levels of controls: planned, in progress, verified, validated, and complete. And this is a baseline we call our cyber certification level 1. So I'll click on that and just show you what that means. So what we've done is these baselines can be created in a number of ways. You can run a wizard when you join the program, answer some questions, it'll build you a baseline. You can create new baselines from templates. We've got built-in baselines, say for HIPAA, for example. But just to give you the sense of the control baseline is this list of elements. And if you make it through this list of elements, this is essentially a defensible cybersecurity program. So what we've done is we've parsed out some of the more generic stuff, added in some of the specific stuff, and gave you these baselines. And so to give you an example of what a baseline looks like, I'm going to click one down here that says doing an IT asset inventory. So this is a control that's part of almost every single cyber regulation somewhere. And it's just a good idea, saying, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to build an inventory of our assets so we know where they're at, who's the owner of them, right? And so these controls are in a structured database. And so when you put one in part of your baseline, it comes with the standard information. So first is the detail, basically describing the control. What is it? It's a list of IT asset inventories. Here's a related policy statement. So all of our controls have an associated security policy with them. Here's some, I would call CSO in a box type guidance. Why is the control important? How might you implement it? And here are some of the built-in regulatory references. So in other words, if I'm doing this, I'm addressing our CPL here, the ISO standard here, HIPAA there, PCI there, NIST 800-171 there, and the US-CSF there. And as you can imagine, you can kind of continue to build those out. There's a self-assessment question. So what you can do is run a wizard and then really do a quick self-assessment. And there's an example of the type of evidence you might produce. In this case, it says an IT asset inventory in digital or paper format, showing asset owners and system classifications. So what we're trying to do, going back to the beginning, is focus on this notion that if you're going to do something, let's try to have some concept of what evidence might be available at the end to support it. And really, in any type of these audits, and of course, if y'all have been through audits, which I'm sure you have, if there's credit unions and banks in here, is that there's always an auditor examining evidence, right, doing sampling. So the whole point of ComplianceShield is to keep track of that. And then here we have this Add Evidence button. And so, for example, if your data classification thing is done, you click Add Evidence, and then you store it here, in the system. I'll show you the evidence button in a minute. And then what you do up here is actually we just take the controls through their different status. Again, NA, planned, in progress is kind of what you described. And then when you go in progress, you can actually build out essentially a work program by picking a target date, and you can assign it out to a specific role. So one of the other things that ComplianceShield does by default is it helps you essentially build what's called the security organization. So there's always going to be some, reference to, have you built and documented the information security organization? So here what you do is you assign the controls to somebody like the information security manager. And then over here in the company tab, you assign a person to the role. So this is kind of one level of indirection. And so really the job is to work through all of these controls. And as you do that, this information rolls up. This is what we call our risk scoring report. It's essentially a one-page measure of the cybersecurity of your organization. And so, one of the reasons we like to do this is that sometimes it's difficult to keep track in these this world of fuzzy administrative controls. Have I actually just done something meaningful? So let's say, for example, you just trained all your employees. Well, in the real world, you've done something very meaningful, but usually no buzzer goes off on the firewall or anything saying, hey, we just did it, right? But in this case, you actually get, your score goes up and you can meaningfully track what you do. I'm just going to touch on this briefly, but there is the capability in ComplianceShield to look across multiple organizational units. So, for example, some people use this feature for vendor risk management, where these companies may be one of their vendors. And if you have the permissions, for example, you could drill down into the company and see how they're actually doing. All right. So going back to the compliance baseline. So really, that's how we deal with these control baselines. And it's one of the first things you can do. You can tag a control with a label. In this case, we put which security policy it's in. And then another case, for example, here we wanted to address the New York State DFS. And so in this case, you can actually add these ties in. And so if you wanted to add, for example, FFIEC or the NCUA or any of these other controls, it's real simple to just tag them, right here in this particular area, so we can tie them up. So I know it's difficult without getting any feedback. I hope this is making some sense, but essentially I just wanted to cover, this is really the core of the compliance feature. There's, as I mentioned, under the compliance tab, we have what's called our evidence tab. And so this is where it gets, I think, really slick. So let's say, as we just talked about, you got your vulnerability scan from Digital Defense. You can actually pop that in here as a piece of evidence to support the control that you have to do a vulnerability scan. Some of the other stuff that Don's group does, the Concensus does, AIM tools or malware, those can actually go in here and you can have kind of one single picture in one place of all the evidence and how it rolls up in your compliance program. So I'd like to then move on into policies, because people talk about this. So really what you want to do, of course, is have a whole library of policies that support your program. And so this is our built-in policy library. It's in our what we call our CPL, our Common Policy Library. And I'm going to show you one, this acceptable use of assets policy. I think one version of it is already up. Yeah, one's already up. These are all in Microsoft Word, and they're basically standard templates. And so one of the things that's important about the content that's not obvious, if you just go out and buy a group of security policies somewhere or download random ones on the web, what people find out is, well, there's a real lack of consistency. And so what we think of as a group of policies is almost like a book with chapters. And so, for example, this is the chapter on acceptable use. This is the one document that everybody in the company should read and acknowledge. And so what we do is say, okay, wow, what does that actually mean? Because when you look in the regulations, it'll just say acceptable use. So what we do in our policies is translate that into these components. So obviously what might happen is you guys would remove our logo and put yours in, you replace company X with your company name, and save and replace, and you have a draft just in a couple minutes. But what's better than that, hopefully, is that, so here's an example, system usage. What is our policy on allowing people to go to Facebook? Can they do that using company machines? By the way, if you see something on Facebook you don't like and you're offended, we're not responsible. And by the way, we're actually might be monitoring your activities, right? Because we have to do that, which websites you go to, et cetera. And then it goes into user IDs and passwords, kind of the stuff you're familiar with, email, posting stuff on box.com, software viruses, protecting your equipment when you are on the road. You get the idea. Telephones and voicemails. And typically what people do is they're like, we're not concerned about this telephone and voicemail thing. We'll just delete. So really the customization in most cases is going to be very simple for folks. And then really these things go throughout the entire product. There are policies. There's some standards, there's some procedures. There's even things like, for example, remember that IT asset inventory. So here's an example of a spreadsheet that's an IT asset inventory. So if it's, what we've tried to do is, as we require more controls, to put samples in here to help you guys, develop that stuff much more quickly. And so I'll just kind of wrap up a little bit here. So what you typically then do is, when you're finished with a policy, you load them up into the My Policies area. So this is where you can upload policies you've already got, whatever it is. But this is kind of important, because what's happening, especially in HIPAA, It started in HIPAA, but there's this thing that says, hey, we want to keep track of the history of our policy documents, right? For how many, 7 years, I think it says. So what this does is enable you to go through draft, review, published, and then archive. And so what you can do is if you might want to track the fact that these policies were published, you can put them in an archive state and then continue to add new ones as you go. And this is, again, kind of its own level of evidence that you're doing things and updating things on a regular basis, which of course is one of the controls that's common in all these frameworks. And then just we've got the notion of what we call a user site. And so there's another element to ComplianceShield, which is what if we could have our users, our employees and contractors actually read and acknowledge these policies, right? And so what you do is you can create one of these, you put them in a published state. And I'm going to show you here under the company tab, there's what's called a user profile. And these are essentially buckets. It's kind of what you described. This is a way to target assessments, training, and policies at people based on their role in the organization. So in this case, we've got all IT users. There's an example of vendors, and maybe you have a subset of users that are mobile, and you want them to read and acknowledge a special mobile policy. But essentially, what you do, it's somewhat simple, is you edit this profile, and things that are published show up in these lists. So I would click add and say, look, I want everybody in this group to read that acceptable use policy we just looked at. We'd also like to take our built-in training. So ComplianceShield comes with a built-in security awareness training library. And also we'd like them to pass this quiz. It's essentially a very simple quiz that'd be difficult to pass if you didn't take the training. Okay, so you basically do that. And then here's where you put up a user in the profile. This is what's going to happen. So you invite them, and when one of your employees, what I'm going to do now is log out of the site as super admin and log in as an employee. It says go to the user site. So now I have an inbox. And so employees, when they go through this, the first time they have their inbox, there won't be any green checks. But essentially it will say, look, Dave, you have to read and acknowledge that policy. So here's that acceptable use policy, but now it's in PDF, right? It's in read only. And the very first time I go through this, they'll click, click, and they'll give them a message saying, by clicking this, you formally acknowledge that you've read the policy. And so as you can imagine, this then creates an audit trail, right? The same thing can go through the training. The training are individual, they're individual videos, 1 to 2 minutes each. We designed the training so that people can actually go through it, within say a half an hour. Our experience is if you make security awareness training too painful, people can get lost. So again, this is kind of an optional component, but a lot of people really like it. There's the quizzes, but I want to make sure we have time to ask questions, so I'm going to kind of head back. So I'm going back to the company site, and here's where you can kind of see, okay, remember when we first logged in, here's where we're at. Here's our controls. Here's those security roles. We actually have one we need to assign to a person. Here's kind of our 14 policies. This is where they're at. And here's a summary of that acknowledgement. So under the reporting tab, we can, for example, run a report and say, all right, let's do policy compliance. Say, all right, here's our 3 published policies. That acceptable use we talked about, 16 people were supposed to take it. 6 of them did it. 8 haven't even opened the thing yet. And nobody did where they viewed it and didn't acknowledge. That's just one of those special things in case, for example, if everyone opens the documents and doesn't ever acknowledge it, maybe there's something, an issue there. But you can run, gap reports on who's done what day they have. And then these reports, of course, can go on training, on your quizzes, whatever you'd like. And, that's essentially the round trip. There's actually an incident reporting area where you can manage incidents and incident types, and employees can actually report incidents through the user site. It's a way to address this requirement that's again in almost every single one of these places that says, do you have an incident reporting and management program, right? And so this is a way to kind of help keep track of that. So, I mean, that was quickly, but that's really it. And I think if I was to leave you guys with one thought, it's that even though the stuff is painful, by doing it once the right way, you can get it done. I mean, we've had, dozens of companies go through this successfully. And when they're done, they pass their audit, they get their cyber insurance. Um, we've actually introduced what we call an Information Shield cyber certification. It's a third-party validation of your security program. That's why we call this certification level 1, where you can bring in an external auditor and get essentially a stamp. And that's designed to be a more scaled down version of, let's say, a SOC 2 report or an ISO certification that can cost many, many, many thousands and take many, many months. So that's it, Don. That's the quick run through.
Hey, Dave, could you talk a little bit about, if somebody has to go through an audit, is there a role or something that the auditor would log in with, or how would you
Yeah,
go
sure.
to that auditor? Could you show that side?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, so under users, for example, you can create different roles. And in this case, Mr. Insurance is an auditor. And what you could do is you would essentially create a user account, you invite them, and you give them the role of auditor. And then what they do is they actually get read-only into your system. And so that way they could come in, they could look at your policies, they can look at evidence, they can look at reports, but they can't, obviously change anything. And so the idea behind that, of course, is to be able to kind of eliminate this spreadsheet problem, if you will. But yeah, this is a really good thing. And what we found is, here's our experience with doing this over and over and over again, is that if you're trying to get to a point of an audit, the fact that you're doing the right thing is almost as important as what you're doing. In other words, that you're keeping track, that you're storing it. And when an auditor logs into the system, they go, wow, these guys have actually know what the heck they're doing. Maybe they're not perfect, but they're clearly going towards something that we recognize as auditors. And that actually makes a big difference, I've found, just perception wise, because they're like, oh, okay, I see this. We kind of designed this with some of our designers are actually information security auditors for a living. That's what they do. So did that answer it, Don?
Yes, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so this time, I'll bring my screen back up if you want to
Sure.
turn yours off for a second. If
Share.
anybody wants to ask some questions, we've got plenty of time. Just go ahead and use the chat, and then I'll read them off to Dave, and we'll kind of go from there. But I'll reshare my screen here with the contact stuff on it. Okay. While we're waiting for a few questions, let's talk about some of the things that I have here on the questions page here. I did want to mention that, we do have a couple links that are on here, and we will be posting this up along with a blog post here in the next week or so. So if anybody wants to forward this webinar on to somebody, we'll send out that link to everybody, and it'll be in our next monthly newsletter as well. But our Concensus blog will have a lot of things out there. Our health check area out there also, if you want us to do a simple cybersecurity review of your organization, you can sign up there. And then if you want to see some more information on ComplianceShield, it's informationshield.com. Just want to mention that we are a reseller. Obviously, you could go direct, but we'd appreciate obviously coming through Concensus. So we are going to obviously be helping everybody implement those things. We do have a role in the organization for some of our small business customers where we're going to be offering, sort of a virtual CIO. So this will be part of their toolkit and part of those engagements. But we definitely can help you just get this set up and help you walk through some of those things. Certainly have experience in the K-12 environment myself in higher ed, so small business as well. So I can help you guys with getting this product up and running as well. And if you would like to find out a little bit more how Concensus can help you, just head on over to info.concensus.com/tech-solutions. And you'll see a whole bunch of areas that we actually have within the company. We're way more than your identity and access management provider.
And Don, I forgot to mention, but there is a free trial of ComplianceShield as well. So
okay.
If people just want to register and go on, poke around and see how it looks, a lot of people decide to do that. So
okay. Yep. And we can help you with that, or you can reach out directly and we'll get that set up for you. I don't have any questions yet.
Wow, I could keep going all day.
I know. This is fun stuff.
Um, well, they either got it or I went too darn fast. Yeah, I'm just so used to going through it quickly. Because typically it's interactive and people have a lot of questions. And so, yeah, I'm fine. If we have some, obviously afterwards, if people have email questions, they can send them to you, Donna. You could forward them to me, and
Yeah. We'll be more than happy to get on the phone together and go through more in detail with anybody as well.
yeah, yeah. I think the baselines. What I would try to leave people with is these baselines that we have, and we have pre-built ones for HIPAA, like I mentioned, for the CSF and for the ISO standard, and then you can create any number of that you want. And if there's something you're really interested in, ask us, and we might already have it. You can go through and build your security control baseline in minutes instead of going through the hours and hours. I mean, I've talked to customers who just got through spending $18,000 with a consultant parsing out the NIST CSF into a control baseline, and you're skipping all that, and you're using the common controls that hopefully you can reuse over and over again when you're building out your program.
Great. Well, I still don't have any questions in the question and answer, so I'm actually going to go ahead and we'll end the webinar here. And again, please reach out if you have any questions, and look for us some more information about ComplianceShield and Information Shield in our next monthly newsletter. Thanks everybody for attending today.
Thanks, Tom.
No problem. Take care, everybody.